Hello and welcome to Dive and Dig, the podcast that takes you on an underwater journey deeper than you might imagine possible to reveal mysteries of the past hidden beneath the waves. Now, this final episode is going to explore what's new in the world of maritime archaeology, and it's also going to investigate challenges to both seas and seafarers, ancient and modern.
If you're on a boat and you're being blown towards the shore, there's only one thing between you and death, and that's the anchor. If it doesn't hold, you've had it, and so's the boat.
Climate change is not something that's going to wait for us to catch up.
Music is one of the important aspects of promoting and protecting, but also raising awareness on cultural heritage to the community.
I'm Bettany Hughes, and this is the Dive and Dig podcast. And I'm here with Lucy Blue. Hello, Lucy.
Hello, Bettany.
Now, we've been exploring how the analysis of any wreck, and especially the Phoenician wreck in Malta, requires a whole range of experts to tell the story. So that's conservators, surveyors, geologists. And what we're learning is how incredibly interconnected the Phoenician world itself was. I mean, slowly the evidence is revealing an idea of connected maritime and cultural landscapes linked by the sea, where the interface was the harbour and the means of connection were the ships and boats. And of course, the motivation of all that was the minds and the imagination of the people who built them and then who sailed on them. One man who can tell us a great deal about Phoenician seafaring is Philip Beale. So, Lucy, tell us a bit more about Philip.
Yeah, Philip is quite a remarkable man. He has had an interest in the Phoenicians, and he not only realised that they had amazingly sophisticatedly constructed vessels, but also that they travelled massive distances, not just from Malta to the Lebanon, but beyond that to the Pillars of Hercules. And according to Herodotus, who reflects on a voyage that was undertaken in 600 BC, so over 2,500 years ago, the Phoenicians actually circumnavigated the African continent. And this is quite an amazing thing to think. And so Philip decided that he wanted to understand if this was actually feasible. And he went about and built a replica of a Phoenician vessel based upon the archaeological evidence and undertook this voyage himself. It's quite crazy, but he did it. And in order to reconstruct this Phoenician boat, he took the archaeological evidence that was available, but he also interviewed local boat builders from Lebanon and Syria and sort of combined that knowledge of traditional understanding of boat building and seafaring, and then built the vessel and sailed it around Africa. And I spoke to Philip about this incredible voyage.
Over the 2 and a bit years that we did the expedition, we clocked up about 20,000 nautical miles around Africa. So yeah, it's quite a long journey, starting in the Red Sea. And when we got to the west coast of Africa, we went and got pushed right out into the Atlantic. And, at one point we were closer to America than we were to the West African coast. And went up to the Azores. We had to wait really for the Gulf Stream bring us back towards the Mediterranean. So yeah, it was a long expedition, some 20,000 nautical miles in total.
Can you describe the boat?
Yeah, so this is a Phoenician galley, really, a trading ship. It wasn't like they had warships as well, which were much more slender and thinner, but their trading boats were very curvaceous, and if you can picture it, like a Viking ship with a single mast and a square sail. However, the Phoenician ships were really quite flat-bottomed, and their hull was really developed for carrying trade.
You must have learnt so much, though, about Phoenician seafaring, probably about yourselves as well, I'd imagine, but what were the take-homes in terms of your knowledge gained of Phoenician seafaring?
I think, one of the most amazing things that one learns is, or that we learnt, is that the Phoenicians have these typically 8 brailing lines that are attached to the foot of the sail that run in front of it, and then up to the yard. And those brailing lines act really as like a Venetian blind that you can pull up and down. And that's incredibly helpful, because if you see that there's a storm coming, you don't have to take the whole sail down or the yard down. You can just full the sail up.
What an achievement. I just love it.
Yeah, no, it was a really incredible journey, and they faced loads of challenges, including modern pirates and many other dangers. But what's really fascinating, Bettany, it's not just, people weren't just taking to the sea 2,500 years ago, they were actually taking to the sea thousands of years ago. And in fact, I'm going to talk to my colleague, Dr. Helen Farr from the University of Southampton, to understand a bit more about her multidisciplinary research. She's revealing how early humans navigated to the shores of Australia over 60,000 years ago.
The interesting thing is that when we think about ancient seafaring, the general public idea, the image that comes into head is of the Vikings, of the Phoenicians even. But actually, when we look at human history, it's also tied with really early seafaring in deep time and coastal navigation and things like that. So I'm looking at some of the earliest direct evidence we have of seafaring, the movement of people into Australia and New Guinea from island Southeast Asia. So some of the earliest evidence we have in that region dates back to 800,000 years ago in the island of Flores. And when we're looking at movement into Australia itself, you're looking at distances of, say, 70 kilometres by around 65,000 years ago, or maybe even earlier.
Wow. Actually, I genuinely didn't realise that it was so early.
Yeah.
Okay, how do we know that people were moving those distances, first of all? Because let's talk about the seafaring in a minute, but what's the evidence of that action actually happening?
Okay, so the really earliest dates, the ones where we're looking at early hominins, those generally are just evidence of people arriving on islands. So it's not direct evidence of seafaring. It would be a little, much to perhaps say that. But people did cross gaps. This is something that hominins are doing, which is very special. And I think that involves seafaring of some sort of level. Other people have called it just culturally enhanced floating or something like that, but I'm not sure. I mean, those really early dates, we have examples of sites, for example, Matamenge, where we have very early lithics, and we know for sure that those are lithics. We know it's an archaeological site. That is something which is anthropogenic. It's culturally made material that we're finding on those sites at those early dates. So we know people must have travelled across some sort of stretch of water. The Australian evidence is a little bit different, because we suddenly have multiple sites and this big expansion of people into an area that they may not have already been in before. So when we're talking about that 65,000-year-old evidence, so we know that people must have travelled into that region by at least 65,000, unless, of course, you follow a different worldview, like many Indigenous Australians, that you've actually always been on country, they've always been there. So it's also important to remember that there are many different narratives that you can investigate seafaring through and different lenses to understand the world when we're talking about human origins.
So, okay, we're talking about directional seafaring, something that is deliberate. The numbers are demonstrating that this wasn't just a happenstance. So what do we have any sense of what types of vessels, what types of boats or rafts they may have been using at this period?
So that's a really good question, Lucy, because it's something that has been argued for a long time. If you accept that the really earliest dates, the million-year-old dates, the 800,000-year-old dates, are just some sort of accidental floating, drifting along with bits of flotsam in the sea, perhaps. But this is a very different thing. This is about technology and boat technology and skill that we see at such an early age. And actually, when you're talking 65,000 years ago, we see stone tools being preserved, and we see faunal assemblages, bits of bone, things like that. But really, how much do we see of this cognitive insight into what people are doing and how they're travelling through the landscape or understanding their world? And I think that's where seafaring gives us this direct lens into some of that, which is why, for me, it's so exciting.
That is remarkable. And it just reminds you never to have a fixed idea about our past, particularly our very distant past. And there's always something new to learn. What do you think presents the greatest challenge to our knowledge expansion today?
One of the biggest challenges at the moment is the sort of rapidly disappearing knowledge bank in some ways. Because of the challenges we're facing with respect to climate change, rising sea levels, coastal erosion, we're now actually losing a lot of knowledge quite rapidly. And a critical factor in all of this is obviously climate. And we have seen how climate change presented a very real threat to our ancient ancestors who lived, like more than 6 million of today's global population, close to the sea.
And it doesn't stop there, does it? Because climate change is also impacting on our very fragile maritime heritage today. And that's heritage that we've learned through this podcast that encapsulates past knowledge. I mean, what is the particular threat to our understanding of this maritime world?
Yes, well, I think there are lots, and I've got a series of people I'd like to introduce you to. And the first one is a friend and colleague of mine, Philip Cousteau, who knows a huge amount about oceans and the threats that the oceans today face, particularly by climate change.
The way I look at it is our work, be it conservation or archaeology, are really two sides of the same coin, in that when we think particularly about coastal habitats, they're always shifting and changing, and particularly with the impacts of human behavior and human actions, and the destruction that humans have wrought on our cultural heritage over the last, say, post-war era, 60 years, is 70 some odd years, is really aligned with the conservation destruction that we've caused, the destruction of the natural world, because they're part and parcel of the same thing. I mean, we are part of the natural world, human beings, and our history and our heritage is inextricably linked to the history and evolution of this planet. And so when we destroy our cultural heritage, it's likely because we're also destroying the natural heritage in the same place. And now with, as you mentioned, sea level rise and, storms and the consequences of things like climate change, we are, accelerating that loss and that damage. And again, it's our identity, who we are, comes from where we came from. It comes from our history, comes from the lessons that we can learn from the past to inform building a better future. And when we lose those lessons, when we lose the past and our connection to the past, I think we lose a connection to ourselves, a piece of ourselves, and that is a tragedy, and also has very real consequences. Are we doomed to continue to make the same mistakes over and over, or can we learn something and evolve? But without that window into our history, there's no way that we can grow and change. And so we lose it. When we lose it, it's a detriment to ourselves and to the future.
Lucy, because we've got such a vivid record of how climate and sea levels have changed in the past, do you think there's a possibility that archaeological evidence can help in our understanding of how the climate might change in the future?
Yes, I think this is a really important point, because we read every day about computer models which can predict the climate for the next decade or even the next millennium. Equally, having detailed pictures of the past, how climate changed and how the environment changed over the millennia, helps us to understand what happened then, what might happen in the future, and also how to calibrate models. So maritime archaeology is a fundamental source of data for checking and improving models of climate change and predicting climate change in the future. We're basically using it as an analogue to reflect on the past to think about the future.
It's really interesting that. So, I mean, great that there's this amount of research being conducted into the impact of climate change on our coastal communities and cities. But there's something else that I hear that you're working on, which is intriguing, that you're working with a team who's documenting the impact of change on maritime culture very specifically in the Middle East, in North Africa, so in the MENA region.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is part of a bigger project, and our team, based in the University of Southampton and University of Ulster, are looking at the impact of threat, I guess, to coastal and underwater environments across Middle East and North Africa, from Morocco through to Iran. The project's called the Maritime Endangered Archaeology of the Middle East, and MARIA, effectively, in short. And we're documenting sites through satellite imagery, published data, monitoring change. And all of this data is being sort of piled together in a massive open access database. And I'm actually going to introduce you to one of my colleagues, because we've heard enough from me. This is Dr. Christel Al-Safadi from the University of Southampton, who's going to talk about MARIA.
So we have two teams with including experts in maritime archaeology and remote sensing. So we mainly rely on remote sensing, on satellite imagery, to identify archaeological sites, maritime sites, and to interpret as well their condition.
How do you use satellite imagery to find material underwater or even along the coastline? I mean, that's quite tricky in some ways, because sometimes the resolution's not good, cloud coverage. How do you go about that, and what level of detail can you acquire?
Yeah, so basically with satellite imagery, like you said, so it depends on the resolution. And sometimes we don't have really high resolution imagery for the MENA region. But we rely, for instance, on Google Earth Pro. So we have a collection of satellite imagery that, it's not just from today's time, but it also goes back to not to historical times, but it goes back from, you can get imagery from the 80s until today. So that really gives us a kind of a progression of how the landscapes and how that maritime zone is changing. Now, by scanning that satellite imagery, we're looking around the coastal zone. I mean, it depends on the archaeological sites, but you can sometimes identify features that look archaeological. You might not really necessarily know that they are definitely archaeological. And this is where the interpretation comes in, as we are the experts looking at that, and we use as well our knowledge of the region and our knowledge of that particular area and what we might be able to find, or what is more or less there that we know about.
And how it changes over time, I presume, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we're considering in this podcast is the whole sort of implication of climate change, which is obviously something that's on everybody's minds at the moment because it's hugely important to address.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the projected sea level rise with climate change and so on, if you have 50 centimeters or up to a meter, that really threatens a lot of the coastal areas, and there are scientific models that show and demonstrate how those coastal regions will be impacted by that sea level rise. So some areas will be properly submerged. Some archaeological sites will be absolutely submerged. And even with that sea level rise, it's not just about submersion, it's about the erosion that it causes on those on that maritime heritage. So there's definitely an impact there, but it's not just about the sea level rise. It's about all of the intensification and storm events and the climate in general. It will basically change the environment.
Currently, though, there are lots of efforts to try and address the problem with the challenges that our world's oceans are facing, not just in terms of cultural heritage, but across the board. And the United Nations is trying to address the ocean challenges by announcing the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So that's happening now, this coming decade. And my colleague John Henderson can tell us more about this initiative, and more specifically, actually, a project that is tackling these issues directly in East Africa.
Well, the Decade for Ocean Science is a UN initiative which is lasting from 2021 to 2030, and it's creating a framework of stakeholders and academics and researchers to improve the health of the oceans. Basically because healthy oceans are absolutely fundamental to human survival. And without healthy oceans, we'll all be dead. And it's absolutely that important. SDG 14, the Sustainable Development Goal 14, is at the key of this, which is about sustainable use of the ocean resources and protecting the ocean to keep it clean. And there's 5 sort of main elements to that. One is about unsustainable fishing practices. There's the loss of coastal and ocean habitats. There's invasive species. There's pollution. And the main one of the key elements, is the effects of climate change.
I've been talking to a number of people about the challenges and threats that maritime cultural heritage faces today. And I know that you've been involved, well, basically you're heading up a pretty large-scale project that takes some novel approaches to addressing some of these challenges and hopefully instill some sustainable outcomes as a result. Can you tell us a bit about the project? I believe it's aptly called Rising from the Depths.
It is. Okay, so I'm currently the project lead of a large £2 million network, which is funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund, which is essentially a UK government fund to do challenge-led research, academic research. And the money is basically aid money. But it's about making people's lives better through using heritage. So what we're doing is seeing how the submerged and coastal heritage of Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique and Madagascar can help create sustainable growth in the region. How can it make people's lives better? How can you create social, cultural and economic benefits from marine cultural heritage? And what we're doing is using a really sort of wide catch-all definition of marine cultural heritage. And it's basically all of the space, coast and sea, that's affected by human action. So it's human action on the sea. In the past, what people have done on coasts, how they've interacted in the sea in the past, how that can inform, management plans in the future, but also help communities in the region today.
One specific Risings project is being conducted by Dr. Ichumbaki from the University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, in collaboration with the universities of Exeter and Southampton in the UK. This project very much takes a community-based, bottom-up, co-creation approach with the aim of developing more sustainable management of maritime cultural heritage and exploring how this can also reflect on maritime practice both past and present. The research focuses on the ancient coastal settlement and fishing and trading port of Bagamoyo. Ichu and his student Claudia are here to tell us more about the project. Claudia is also famous in Tanzania as a pop artist, aka Chemical, and the song you're hearing now is one that she and Ichi co-wrote and Chemical performed. It's named after the project Bahari Yetu Urithi Wetu, meaning our ocean, our heritage.
The co-creation approach that we have been taking in Tanzania, and especially along the coast of Tanzania, dealing with various aspects of heritage, both tangible and intangible, has been very beneficial. It's beneficial in the sense that people feel as part and parcel of the activities, the research activities that are being taken, contrary from the previous undertakings where they are considering themselves as assistants to the researchers. Now with the co-creation, collaborative research, where the local community are at the center of research, they feel like we are doing our work, we are protecting our heritage, we are given voices and our voices will be heard by other people. For instance, from the legal point of view in Tanzania, the ocean and its contents has never been part and parcel of what is considered as heritage. It's not in the law, it's not in the policies, it's nowhere at all. But the local people, the ocean is their number one heritage because this is where they get almost everything they want. I would recommend that all sorts of heritage research, they will become beneficial and important if from the start they engage the local people and make local people at the forefront of every activity planned in the project implementation.
My name is Claudia Lubao, famously known as Chemical, and I'm a musician, and I've recently graduated with Masters in Heritage Management from the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Music is one of the important aspects of promoting and protecting, but also raising awareness on cultural heritage to the community. The Baharietu song forms part of the community and public awareness raising activities on the challenges facing people in the coastal zone. Well, to me, these songs are of great impact. First, because of the message they carry. A song like Baharietu educate, protect, and promote the importance of seas and ocean to our daily lives. They have bigger outreach in terms of viewers, downloads, streams, and bloggers. Many blogs have been blogging about these kind of songs, and so they have been able to get, a huge airtime. Yeah. These songs are played in clubs, travel buses, bus stops, town centers, and everywhere. You could hear Barietu, you could hear Kilwayetu everywhere you go. To me, inspiring and seeing people and see people learning from my music is one of the best feeling ever. So I can say my call to other musicians is they should not always try to look on the other side of music, on the happy side. They should also try to look on the other stuffs, because people still want to be educated, people still want to be inspired, and these are kind of songs that inspire, motivate them, but also educate them. Yeah.
But it's not just through music that we engage with the public, and in particular the younger generation, who, after all, are the custodians of the future. The Honor Frost Foundation is funding a project called Baja, meaning seaman in Arabic. This is taking place in Egypt and aims to engage school children with the idea of preserving maritime cultural heritage. Here's the project director, Nada Nofal.
Here we are at the Alexandria National Museum in Alexandria, the second city of Egypt in northeast of Africa. And this is sound for 30 children who are enjoying their time on our workshop.
Why is it important to communicate maritime archaeology to these children? What's the context of your project?
Actually, our project is a maritime archaeology outreach project and known in social media with Bahar. Bahar is aiming to introduce the children to the maritime archaeology and marine environment and raise public awareness on underwater cultural heritage. Our target audience is children from 5 to 12 years old. Actually, I believe children are the main core of any community, and educating children on maritime archaeology and underwater cultural heritage not only helps to create an informed and aware generation, but also help us to educate the parent and the teacher who's always attending Bahar workshops.
And there is one particular project that is currently exciting great archaeological interest. It's a shipwreck off Gozo near Malta. The research team, led by Dr. Timmy Gambin of the University of Malta, are pushing the limits of diving to reach the site so they can explore the remains of the wreck. Timmy Gambin is back, and just Timmy, I mean, you work on a number of incredible sites. That Phoenician ship is just so special, though. How has it changed your opinion and understanding of the Phoenicians so far? Because I know there's still a lot of work to do.
The Phoenicians were intrepid sailors, not just locally, but if you can trace their connectivity from the Eastern Mediterranean all the way to the Atlantic and possibly beyond, it just makes them incredible seafarers. And seeing how difficult it is today with all the technology available, with all the modern technology available, GPS, chart plotters, satellite phones, and yet people still struggle or sometimes struggle to sail from A to B, actually gives you a massive appreciation of what these sailors, what these people of the sea were achieving 2,700 years ago.
So, Timmy, that's really beautiful, actually, because I think it does reflect our understanding of the amazing achievements of the Phoenicians. But you talk about modern day technology. You've also faced the challenges of using these new techniques. And in reflection, how do you think these new technologies are helping us understand and discover deeper, stay longer, map more extensively?
This is an absolutely incredibly important point, Lucy, because every generation of archaeologists believe that they are at the forefront of technological innovation. I mean, if we look back at the photographs of Honor on her various projects, one is astounded as to how they achieved what they managed to achieve. And today we believe that we've got the latest and best sort of gadgets and equipment. But yet what is really happening is that we have taken the baton from the likes of Honor Frost. We are nurturing it, developing it, only to pass it on to younger generations of archaeologists. So the technology is great, it's there, it does facilitate certain work, but within 30 to 40 years, they'll be looking back at the group photos of our Phoenician expedition and probably wondering how on earth we did manage to achieve what we did with the equipment that we had. So this perspective, I believe, is very, very important. So yes, we maximize the technology available, and through this maximization of technology, we facilitate, or we at least contribute in part to its development and bettering.
It's just brilliant to hear how passionate Timmy is about his work and that particular site. And he was obviously inspired by Honor. So what do we do to inspire the next generation of potential maritime archaeologists?
I mean, this is so important because, as we've heard, maritime archaeology, the maritime cultural landscape is facing so many challenges, whether it's, anthropogenic or natural. And I think one of the things we need to do is to document, as we've heard, to take a record of a maritime cultural heritage. But the other thing is that we have disparities in knowledge bases. And I think one of the really important things that I spend a lot of time working on is something called capacity building. So basically helping people to acquire more skills. So in parts of the world where they don't necessarily have maritime archaeologists on tap, we're going out there and helping train and inspire people to really engage with their maritime cultural heritage. And this is from sort of antiquities departments through to the next generation, as you say, because education is key to all of this. And I think engaging, as we heard from our friend Nada, with school children across the board, they're going to be the custodians of the future. So education is absolutely critical. But I think also part of that is about community. We need to get community on board, and we really need to think about what is important in terms of heritage to local communities, because we're the professionals, so-called, and we believe that built heritage, what we feel is important to connect with the past is not necessarily what communities in coastal areas also connect with. So I think we have to be engaging with people across the board, with the antiquities departments, with children, school children from an educational perspective, but also local coastal communities, because it's about these different perspectives on maritime cultural heritage, which is really important. And that's the way that we look towards sustainability, because without all of those people on board, then we're not going to have a sustainable future. And particularly when we think about it in terms of the massive challenges that are facing us at the moment. This is happening rapidly, as we know. Climate change is not something that's going to wait for us to catch up. And so we really need to engage with this now and get everybody on board in terms of conserving and preserving, or at least appreciating and understanding our maritime cultural heritage.
It's so critically important, that, because the one thing I know as a historian is that memory matters, history matters, the past matters. And the great thing is that scientists have kind of now caught up with us, and they tell us that physiologically we are creatures of memory. So at a molecular level, we carry memory right across our brains. We can't have a future thought unless we access a past experience or a past idea of some kind. So if we deny the past, it's not just that we're kind of, playing fast and loose with history. We're cauterising our potential as humans, and we're limiting the potential potential of the future. So, it's something that at all points of the time compass, maritime archaeology matters. And I just want to say to you, Lucy, because I know this all sounds quite romantic, it can be quite tough out there in the field sometimes doing this archaeology. You get very hot, you get very cold, you get very salty or very, very muddy. So, power and kudos to you and all your colleagues for allowing us to witness these incredible remnants and survivors from the past. It's just what a delight. And what a delight to hear how dynamic the discipline is, where it's going in the future, both philosophically and practically. So, this has been the last episode of Dive and Dig podcast with me, Bettany Hughes, and Lucy Blue. It was made with the support of the Honor Frost Foundation, and please do check in with the website for more editions in the future. Thank you for listening, and let's all just please cherish our seas and their stories, past, present and future.